Welcome back to the Godly Young Men podcast. This is episode 57. We are very grateful for you joining us, either YouTube or audio. Joe, we've got a fascinating episode that we're going to get into today about taking risks. There's something about risk-taking that just almost kind of feels inherently manly, right? Like just, men are supposed to take risks. And, then on the other hand, you've got people that say, well, no, taking risks is stupid, and therefore you should, whether or not it's manly or not, you shouldn't take risks. And so we're going to delve into that with this episode. We've actually got a lot of ground to cover. You might be thinking, okay, how in-depth can you go on taking risks? But we want to cover kind of, okay, how true is it that risk-taking is kind of a manly thing to do? We just came off of an episode about do masculine things, hunting, fishing, working out, sports, that kind of thing. So this is, somewhat similar in the sense that, again, risk-taking is commonly associated with men, whereas women are typically more risk-averse. They don't like to take risks.
They like security.
Men, on the other hand, I've certainly seen that in my own life. My dad is a lot more of a risk taker, and my mom is not.
Yep. Likewise, yeah.
And so, there's something along the lines of masculinity that has to do with risk taking. So that's why I wanted to cover it. We've got several different areas we're going to look at. But Joe, why don't you kind of, for our audience, listeners, whatever, tell them what we're not talking about.
Yeah. Here's what we're not talking about: brainless, stupid, irresponsible, idiotic activities that might cause you physical harm. You see these TikTok challenges.
They are risk-taking.
The Tide Pods, the cinnamon challenge where you take it and you could actually...
What was it, the milk crate challenge? It was like where
that's right, where you're like 12 feet in the air on these milk crates hoping that they balance. Please don't be stupid.
Right.
We're not talking about those, okay? So when it's like, I take risks all the time. If those are the risks you're talking about,
that's not what we're talking about.
This actually, keep listening. This podcast is for you.
Well, the other thing is you do have, kind of like teenage guys that just goof off and are, kind of numbskulls together.
We're walking through the mall the other day, and of course I'm trying to avoid, they got the little cars that the kids can drive, like 5-year-olds can drive. And I got my 2 boys, and I'm trying to avoid it because, like, I'm not paying for it. I don't have 4 arms to push you. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
This is going to be impossible. And sure enough, as we kind of walk by the area, we hear, I don't even know how he got the car to make the sound. I guess if you turn it, it kind of does. 15-year-old kid in there just messing around, goofing off with his buddies. And like, please don't do that. We're talking about being godly young men. This is something that we're seeing in Generation Alpha a lot of, just kind of these, but every generation, I would say, kind of has these mindless,
it's a youth
14,
thing,
15, 16 years old where you're doing this. So we're not talking about, when we're talking about taking risks, we're not talking about guys being numbskulls.
Yeah.
Going out and doing really stupid things, taking unnecessary risks with your health, with the parkour thing where guys are hanging off buildings and it looks super cool on TikTok or on Instagram Reels. It's not.
Essentially, it's things that are dangerous with no real upside.
Yeah, exactly.
Like no purpose really, no potential, and they might cause you like serious harm.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
you
like
could
the downside is death. The upside is you got like 1 million views on Instagram. Good for you. What tangibly does that do?
Right. So that's not what we're talking about.
Right.
Again, just being stupid, TikTok challenges, whatever. But we do have several categories that we're going to talk about. Essentially, how risky should we be?
Yeah.
Because we do not fall on the side of take zero risks, play it safe every time. I do think that is kind of a feminized thing to do, if that makes sense. Like, I do think there is some element of, and again, we're going to get into all the areas, but like, maybe take a risk here. Maybe be a little risky here. And so let's get into it, Joe. Let's start with kind of the physical aspect, physical topic here, like our bodies, basically. How risky should we be when it comes to activities? I'm thinking of things like skydiving, motorcycles, four-wheeling. We just got back from a snowmobiling trip that was super fun. Snowmobiling is risky. How risk-averse should we be on those things? I'll just open that up to you.
Yeah, this is a difficult discussion because as I just got done saying, about the parkour and such. Some guys may look at that as being ultra-masculine, that they are taking risks, that, they're pushing their body to the limits. I could almost see a case for it, but the problem is you do have to be responsible with what God's given you.
Yeah, good steward.
Yeah, a good steward of what God's given you. So if the risk is like up here and the chance of survival is you go, well, a lot of people survive. There's certain things like the parkour where you're hanging off the Burj Khalifa over in Dubai. Like, you could die. You slip and die. That's really not good. Whereas I look at some of these other things, again, going snowmobiling. You're not hearing of a ton of guys dying of snowmobiling.
I mean, it's possible, but yeah.
It is possible, but if it was happening all the time, they probably wouldn't do it. It's the same thing with skydiving. I got a good buddy who's very big.
Have you ever skydived?
I have not.
Yeah,
it's actually on my bucket list. I'd love to skydive at some point.
My wife it's at the top of her bucket list.
Is it really?
She really wants to skydive. I'm kind of not.
Yeah, my wife is like, if you skydive, I'll kill you. So if you don't die from the skydiving, you'll die from me. But I have a buddy who actually loved it so much he ended up getting certified. He broke his back doing it, and then JP and recouped. And he's an instructor and packs his own parachutes and everybody else's, and he's a big deal now in skydiving in Colorado. And good for him. And so as we're talking about it, how risk averse should we be? I don't have a problem with pushing your body and pushing your mind to the limits from a physical standpoint that pushes past what you think you may be able to do. But again, look at the risk involved of how many guys are dying. How many people are dying from this? If people are dying right and left,
skydiving is pretty safe as an example.
I was going to say skydiving is very safe because they're not letting you do like crazy skydives, halo jumps from the very beginning. You got an instructor, things like that. So push yourself, but do it with intelligence in mind, I would say.
I look at all these, like the ones I put down, skydiving. I would skydive. I am a little fearful of heights. Like, it's just that I'm not like scared to death. I'm like a phobia type of thing. I don't really love heights. So I don't really ever see myself skydiving, but if it came down to it, could I? Yeah, like I don't think it's that big a risk. Then so I put motorcycling on here as well. I never plan to own a motorcycle. I never really plan to ride on. To me, those just are not the safest thing in the world either. But some people look at me and go, "Man, you're a wimp. You're not very manly." That's just not I don't see a lot of upside to a motorcycle. But then some people do. You know what I mean? Like
I'm just going to caution you. Please don't get a motorcycle. Please don't get one. And the reason why is I know multiple. I can count multiple people I know who have died on motorcycles.
Yeah.
I had a buddy, 19 years old, joined the Army. His dad. I was buddies with his dad too, in the hockey community. He's a basic training, saves up his Army paychecks, and finally gets himself a motorcycle. Really wanted one of those, super fast motorcycles. His dad's like, "Look, man, that's pretty dangerous. Like, just make sure you're wearing your helmet and everything." "Oh, I'm good. I will. I think it was less than a month later he was dead.
Wow.
I'm not saying that's going to happen to you per se, but the temptation to get a motorcycle at a young age, look, you're not getting the old Harley, doing this. You're getting the fast bikes that go 190.
Yeah.
A lot of times for young men.
And you're not going to get the bike in just to go 40.
Exactly. You don't get the bike to go the speed limit. So very strong caution against those things. And I understand. Here's what I'll say and I think you'd agree with this. This is kind of in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. Like, you have to know what your limit is. Yeah. For mine, I'm not stepping foot on a motorcycle. I did snowmobiling. I was not good at it. That's for sure.
You practice.
But would I do it again? Absolutely. Would I try? I've done four-wheeling. Would I go skydiving? No doubt. Would I do other things like that? Would I do bungee jumping? Yeah, probably.
I've got on here I went black bear hunting. That's not exactly the safest thing in the world, but I think to your point, I think everybody kind of does have okay, I'm not going to cross that line.
Right.
I don't really see a problem with that if your line is different.
But what we would say is don't have your line be on the floor where it's like nothing. Yeah. I won't do anything. I don't want to go outside my house. I'd rather play video games.
That's a great point.
No, you need to be pushing yourself.
Push yourself a little bit.
Right. Snowmobiling was pushing myself. I've had back surgeries, wasn't in a great spot, physically, as near as much as I want to be. I'm going to push myself a little bit. Does it hurt? Yeah.
And you had a good time. Yeah.
But I had a really good time doing it. Something I'd like to get better at. So from a physical, and we're going to move on, but from a physical, I would say push yourself a little bit. Make sure it's not on, again, that the bar is on the floor, like you're not willing to do anything. You do want to have something to step over, but you also don't want the bar to be so high that by the time you jump over it and come back down, you're dead.
Right.
Be smart with it. Understand what that may be, and you may be saying, well, this is a biblical podcast. Where's the scripture for this? Look, we see a lot of young men like David taking risks.
Fought a lion and a bear. He fought a 9-foot-tall giant.
That's exactly it. Like, clearly, he's not risk averse. And you might say, well, he's putting his life on the line. Yeah, but for his country and for his family and for other people and with God on his side. Whereas what we're talking about is getting the motorcycle and taking it 95 on the back roads of Wyoming. Who's tangibly benefiting from that? Be smart about it. The point of a man taking physical risks, hunting, things like that, ultimately is to, and probably not for you on this one, that's more for fun, but to feed your family, to support, to provide, to step up against the threats that are, coming against you. That's the point of being a man. And if you're not taking risks on the day-to-day when that's not on the line, what's going to happen when it is on the line?
Yeah.
That's why we do the manly things from a physical. Get us into the relational, though.
Yeah, so there's so that was the physical. Next area is relational. There's kind of two areas to this. It's a Godly Young Men podcast, talking about females here, like, talking to females, girlfriends, that kind of thing. But then also just friendships in general. And I'm going to kind of share what I mean real quick. But you say, well, okay, how can I be risky when it comes to females? What I mean by that is, like, there's some guys just like, well, I'm never going to skydive. I'm never going to do any of these things. They're just never going to talk to girls. Yeah. They see it as like, I'm not going to take that risk. I'm not going to, pursue that relationship, whatever. And that's something that I would say you need to not be risk averse about that.
Right.
Like if you want to find a wife, and obviously we have come out and said if you're 15 years old, you don't need to be thinking about dating. Like we're not really talking about that. We're talking
Right.
more on the older end. If you're somebody 19, 20, you're thinking about marriage, you're not going to get there by being risk averse. You
Right.
need to put yourself out there. Like go talk to the attractive. I'm a big believer in, never be afraid to talk to the prettiest girl in the room. Like have that confidence that you can do that. A lot of guys are risk averse about that. They don't want to do that. I'll let you talk on that, and then I'll get into kind of the friendship side of it if you want.
You want to be the one pursuing them, ultimately,
Yeah.
not them pursuing you. And I've seen it work where the girl just chases down the guy, and the guy is like super awkward and doesn't want to talk, but the girl is like, I'll talk enough for you. And the guy goes, okay, that works, I guess. You don't want that to be the case. You want to be the one that it doesn't necessarily like drive every conversation, but where there's a flow back and forth where you're pursuing her, you're taking some risks, you're having to get outside your comfort zone. I love what you said about the prettiest girl in the room. Take the risk, take the shot. What happens? She says no. Well, if you never ask her, it's a no anyway. So
it's the more manly thing to do to ask her and she says no than to never ask her at all.
yeah, exactly. And then if you take it as great, another girl rejected me. No, don't be that guy. Take it as, okay, why are they rejecting me? And maybe ask yourself a little bit of where you're coming from. Don't get angry at the world, but figure out a way to, okay, what am I looking for? And I would say for the prettiest girl in the room, if she's a jerk, don't go after her just because she's
Right.
pretty. Find the right one, but this is for a different podcast. As far as it goes with taking risks, though, I think you're spot on, but you're going to bring up...
Yeah, so the other side is friendships of like, listen, it is sometimes a risk to try to be really good friends with somebody because you have to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to sacrifice maybe something that you want. So you know what a lot of people do is they just don't really put the time and effort into this. You see this a lot, unfortunately, with females.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work to establish a good friendship, and so they just maybe they don't want to get burned, they don't want to get hurt. And so they just don't really put in the time. Maybe they have shallow acquaintances, shallow friendships, but they never have any truly deep friendship relationships. And maybe you're listening and watching and you're this way of like, you don't really want to get close to people. That's the type of risk aversion that is kind of a bad thing that I'm talking about with friendships. Of like, put yourself out there, try to be good friends with people. If they burn you, they burn you.
But the reality is you could be burnt. Like,
Yeah.
we're not telling you that's not the case. The point Will's saying is spot on, which is take the risk anyway. Yes.
It's worth it.
It's worth it because you may find the best friend you've ever had, and you may not. They may hurt you. It's a risk we have to be willing to take, because if we never take the risk, we're lonely. And when we're lonely, especially as guys, we get into porn, we get into, all sorts of bad stuff we're not getting into. We become recluses. We end up staying downstairs and watching Netflix all day. Like, we don't want to be lonely. We want to be somebody who takes the risk, who goes out, puts himself into certain situations, who goes into the group of 9 other guys standing around, and you don't have to be the life of the party, but you're willing to go take the risk of putting yourself out there.
Right.
And that's what we're talking about from a relational standpoint is, not wanting to get close to people so you don't get hurt will only ultimately lead to you being hurt in loneliness.
Yeah, that's a great... the loneliness point is very, very good. Let's go ahead and move on. We got a few more areas to hit. Career. So for your career, we've talked physical, we've talked relational. Should you play it safe or should you take risks? This is going to be an interesting question. I'm interested to hear your answer because you kind of have the old-fashioned standard play it safe venture, which is 30 years at the same job. Work your way up.
Stability.
Very stable, earn the same paycheck, get a raise every 5 years or so, work, just very, very secure, very stable. Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. I do think in today's economy and environment, that's a whole lot harder to do and make a good living based off of that. But that's kind of the safe way to do it. Or do you take risks? Because, you have things like just branching out into maybe unsure, not as stable business ventures, or maybe try to freelance, start your own business. I mean, that's always a risk. So, Joe, what are your thoughts on this question? Because you might say if you're a bachelor, taking risks is probably a whole lot easier for you to do. Like all that you're depending on is yourself. You bet on yourself, you'll be fine. But when you have a family, which we encourage all godly young men to have, you do have to be a little bit more careful with this when it comes to your career. So what are your thoughts on this? Should you play it safe or take risks with your career?
I'm glad you mentioned it because I do think when you're early on, I would take as many risks as is necessary. I'm not going to say as possible because there may be some really stupid risks. But the idea of especially if your parents are open to you going and living back home, not that you want to, but if the worst case scenario was I got to go live with my parents for a few months till I get back on my feet because I tried and I failed. Okay, that's different than my family's destitute. We have no money. My wife is going to have to go work, whatever it is.
Right.
No, so to your point, that's a great point to make of I think the risk ought to change the curvature of this, whatever you want to say. It should be going down after. Not that you're not going to take risks after you have it, but the risks are more calculated and they're a lot more prayer, a lot more thought goes into these things. When you're a young man and you have an opportunity to just get in there and somebody asks you to go help with something, it's like, okay, it's a one-time thing. Let's just go help. Yeah, take those risks. That's what I would say because, on the negative end. Should you play it safe? We've already had a Chasing Your Dreams episode, and I would say if the risk is I'm going to go into photography and I'm going to give up everything and I'm going to spend $100,000 on an education to go do this, to me, no, because once again, what's the upside? The best case scenario is you are in the upper 1% of everybody else. Whereas I look at, a career that you chose, a career that I chose. I don't have to be in the upper 1% to make a good living for my family.
Provide for your family.
I don't have to be somebody that has to stand out 24/7. No, I just need to be good at what I do. If you're banking on YouTube is another one. You better be in the top 1% of all YouTubers if you're really going to be making a legitimate living on this. So the taking a risk, and I know that's not specifically what we're talking about, but like the taking a risk, you have to consider these things when at a young age, so that when when you have a family, you're ready to kind of settle down and be thinking a little more clearly about things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Because, the other thing is you consider, when you're young, I'm with you. It does make a little bit more sense to be a little bit more risky, maybe to try some new things. Starting a business, it's one of those things, and we're going to have at the end like what we recommend regarding risk taking. And so taking calculated risks is one of those things when it comes to starting a business, of like actually planning it out and is this possible? Is this feasible? Versus the really safe route. I do think that in general, if you have the trust and faith in God, it is okay to take some risks when it comes to your career, even if you have a family. Let's say you get I've had several of those where I've had a job opportunity pop up that is different, is not maybe the most stable thing. It's the most stable thing in the world, and that was the decision I had to make in the moment of how risk averse am I going to be here? Am I going to stay with what I know and it'd be a whole lot safer? Or am I going to try this other venture that might provide some greater benefits to my family? And that's just something you have to weigh and decide. But what I would say is don't just be Mr. I just want to stay in this one place working at, I don't even want to give any examples, but like one place for the next 50 years. Because typically, again, in today's economy, that's not going to work out super well.
Yeah, there was a time, as you referenced, there was a time where that was the case. Hey, Johnson, good to see you for the next 30 years. You walk in and it's the same thing every single day. And
they put their kids through college and bought a house.
Exactly.
And you're not doing that typically.
Your 401k set. You're doing fine. Your house costs $80,000.
Right.
We live in a world of hustle culture. We live in a world where you kind of
multiple income streams.
Correct. You do have to take more risks time and again. And so, yeah, if you're risk averse and you're not willing to do that, the idea of I'll just stay here for the next 30 years. Look, if you get that and it's stable and they are giving you raises and your family's happy and you get to come home and say, good for you. I'm just with you. I think there's an idealism to that.
Bet on yourself and bet on God is what I would say. Doesn't mean be stupid with it. Let me just throw myself out there. No, be smart with it, but put your trust in God. Bet on yourself of I know I'm going to succeed at whatever I do. That's the confidence we're talking about. Let's get into the last area, Joe, as far as risk taking. That is financial.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting discussion here because think about debt. Debt is a risk.
Yeah.
Debt very much is a risk. So should you risk it? Obviously, there's guys like Dave Ramsey who come out and say basically all debt is wrong.
Right.
Or bad, not wrong. Bad, but he's kind of inconsistent with it because he still says you can have a house note. That's still debt. But, I get why Dave Ramsey and people like that say that you should not go into debt. And there's different types of debt. Obviously, having a house payment is not the same as having $40,000 of credit card debt.
Right.
But when it comes to debt at all, most people would tell you need to avoid debt because of the risk and all those things. And generally, I agree. But what are your thoughts on this? How safe should you play it when it comes to new business venture pops up? You have the opportunity to invest maybe some of your savings. Maybe the risk averse thing to do is no, I'm going to keep it in savings. I might need it. Maybe the more risky
3% that I'm getting.
Maybe the more risky thing to do is to put the money into XYZ new business venture, whatever, that you could lose a lot of it or you could make a whole lot more.
High stakes, high reward, yeah.
What are your thoughts on this whole financial side?
This is so tough. Do I think you should risk debt? Yeah, if it's the right debt. I would say house, as you said, you own something. And yeah, we could get into the government actually owning it and everything else. I understand. I'm not going to get into the conspiracy end of things, but also kind of how it actually works. At the end of the day, owning a house is a big deal. That's the reason why it's kind of a benchmark for a lot of people. Yes, that's debt. I don't have, $400,000 to go
sitting around.
As much as Dave Ramsey would love for me to just save up from my McDonald's paycheck and put it cash toward it, it's just not going to happen. So But I would also say this is where you get into big trouble. I would take more of Dave Ramsey than less.
Yeah. I'm not trying to slander Dave Ramsey. He's got a lot of good advice.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I think his advice was horrible when he was telling people, don't buy. It's like, they should have bought, and they would have been in, especially when the interest rate was low. Now
they could have ridden the wave up.
Yes, he hit a lot of people when it was a bad time. Like, well, now's not the time to buy. Like, don't just listen to everything he says. But there's a lot of young men that I would say the moment they can get a credit card, the moment they can go out and buy an expensive car, or the subwoofer to put in their car, or whatever, to soup it up, or whatever it is, like, that can be really, really dumb, and you can get yourself into serious issues. Here's another one. What about education? You take the risk of $85,000 in debt, and really nowadays it's over 6 figures in debt to go get your education. That's a massive risk in debt you're taking of, I'm going to be able to afford this, because you're going to be saddled with this for the next probably 20 to 30 years. Yeah. You have to think about that.
I'll just give my opinion on this, because let's be real. We haven't brought scripture up. A lot of this is opinion about being a good steward, kind of. My opinion on debt is essentially, for credit card debt, I'm against it. Like, do not keep a balance on your credit card. I have a credit card, but I pay it off every single month, and so we don't keep a balance on there. Car, it's been really nice. I paid off my car 2 years ago, and it's been really nice not having a car note, but we're about to need a bigger family car, and so I'll probably have to go into a little bit of debt for that. I'm not opposed to it. I think, generally speaking, if you can stay out of debt, stay out of debt. School, I'm glad you brought that up. If you're staring $120,000 in student loans in the face, say no to that. Like, I'm sorry, unless you're going to be a surgeon or something.
That's what I was going to say. Unless it's something that you're going to be paying that back rather fast.
Right.
But your liberal arts degree for $120,000 where you're going to be working at Starbucks.
Right. Or, I'm going to say it, your Bible degree at Freed-Hardeman for $140,000. Right. That's going to take a while to pay back. So,
right.
Let's go ahead and get into what we recommend regarding risk-taking, because it plays into this. And this first one that I already referenced.
As you said real fast.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because you have it on here, and I just want to say, investments, crypto, real estate, you referenced it, and I want to say this real fast, because this is a young man's thing. Crypto's real big. You invested in it. I invested in it. I didn't invest a ton. You probably invested a little more than me.
I invested more than I should have.
Yeah, well, you and me both. I think you a little more than me.
It's going to come back. It's going to come back.
That's right. We're riding the wave. These are long-term things. Truly, I've thought about, well, I'll just sell it off and take the whatever, less than 1,000 at this point on what I have, which is brutal. Like, ouch. Took a dip. But, I'm not going to pull it out. That's a long-term thing. So you have to understand when you're going to take risks, there are certain investments that are smart.
Play the long-term game.
Play the long-term game on these things. But also don't put yourself so much where my life savings is going to go into BitTorrent or whatever it is. The way, like, no, you could put $1,000 or $2,000 if you have the money there. Be smart with it when you're taking financial risks. But if you have an opportunity to invest in real estate is really good. But do your research when it comes to these things.
Correct. And again, because the other thing that would probably be a dumb thing to do, just like maybe dumping your whole savings into crypto, another dumb thing to do, in my opinion, is keeping all your savings in a bank account where you're making 0.5% interest. Find mutual fund, like Edward Jones, other places like that. H&R Block, maybe, I think, is one of them. Like places that you can do investments where you're getting 6 to 8% interest, and it's risky, but it's I don't know. I think that's way smarter than what a lot of people do, which is just keep money in a bank account. But this gets to what we recommend regarding risk taking, and that is, number one, take calculated risks.
Yep.
These are our principles that we're going to recommend. We're not saying don't take any risk. We're not saying take every single risk you possibly can. What we're saying is take calculated risk for all of these: your career, your investments that you make financially, physically. Going back to the first one we started with. Be intentional about it. Be calculated about it. Don't just, there's a risk. Cool, let me take it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, you see this with some people where it's like, I could lose everything or make 5% on what I have. How stupid could you be?
Right.
Like, if you could lose everything and make 100%, okay. Now we're talking whether that's a risk worthy of taking or not. If there's a family involved and you could lose everything, I would say no. But if you're a young man and you can put your $15,000 of savings or whatever it is, which is a lot, but if you were to put it in something and lose it, you'll make that money back, and it's only against you. This is the calculation we're talking about. Is yes, do your research, be prepared for the worst. You hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst. If everything goes wrong here. Right. My dad's got the worst luck in the stock market. He's he would dabble in a little bit, not big stakes, but he dabble in a little bit. Everything that he did, it's like, oh, of course we're gonna need more concrete. Boom. Oh well, of course, like it was AT&T or something. Like, of course that's gonna be fine. Boom. Everything went down. It's like, just don't do it.
Your dad single-handedly is wrecking stocks.
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, Dad, I'm gonna bet the short or whatever they say. Like, let me put it in. Whatever you're doing, I'm gonna say it's going to go down, and we'll. Just because it's the Brian Wilkie effect. But no, this is the calculation is you have to be prepared for the worst and know I may lose it all.
Yeah.
He lost a lot of money. I lost. When we were young, when I was 16 years old, I put in $4 or $5 grand into something. We lost all of it.
Oh,
and
wow.
it could have been huge. They had vitamins in the cap. They had patented vitamins in the cap. Carmelo Anthony was drinking it, and they had several in the Denver area that were doing it, like athletes, and it was supposed to be a huge deal because they had the patent. Next thing you know, you see the guy driving around in a Corvette, and the thing's done. Like, he just took everybody's money. It was really bad.
Yikes.
But anyway, this is what I'm saying is you have to be prepared to lose the money if you're going to take the risk.
That gets us into the second thing that I have on here as far as what we recommend kind of principles.
Yeah.
Consider the other people involved.
Yep.
How trustworthy are they? You think about like investments, for instance. Buddy comes to you, hey, I'm thinking about starting a business. Can you give me $15,000? If your buddy's a numbskull who always has done idiotic things his entire life, you probably don't want to invest in his business. You know what I mean? Like, if he's shown to make smart decisions and, done well with things, maybe you invest in it. That's what I mean when I say consider the other people. The other thing on here that I would say, like, when we're talking about career changes, consider, like, if you're thinking about maybe taking a riskier step with your career, what management are you going to be working for?
Yep.
Who are you going to be working with?
Yep.
Those are things that you need to
the other people.
Yeah.
You have to.
That needs to go into your calculation of your risk taking.
Yeah, no doubt. If your friend asks you for $2,000 and he's got Elon Musk backing him, yeah, maybe take $2,000. If he's asking for $15,000 and it's just him, probably not.
Right.
These are the things we're talking about. This is the calculation that you better go in being the expert on everything when you go to take a risk. If it's going to cost you everything, if it's going to cost you $5, okay, you don't have to be the expert, but calculations do matter. To your second point, consider the other people involved. Third, I would say, and you mentioned this earlier.
I forgot I had it on there. I said it earlier.
That's
and I
okay,
forgot to put it
but we're going to say it again because it's really good. Bet on yourself. If you know you can come through. And what we mean by that is, my dad, I'll use him as an example in a positive way now. When he was young, he started his business, but it was like, if I work my butt off, which he literally worked 80 to 100-hour weeks when we were young, if I work that much, I think I can make this work. And sure enough, he made it work, and his business went, very big because he bet on himself.
He knew he could.
He knew he could. He knew that if I really put the time and the effort and everything else, if I was dedicated, so he bet on himself, and it really worked out. Now imagine if you bet on that, but you're having to wait on somebody else, which is what he had previously. That's why he bought him out. He had it previously, and the other guy didn't want to do anything and went nowhere. So as far as it depends on you, don't put your hands in, don't put your fate in the hands of stupid people. Is another one of his things. Like, it goes to the second one, but bet on yourself when possible, because you'll work harder than anybody will for it.
And I'll tie this into the fourth one.
Sure.
What we've got on here is don't be stupid. Follow your gut on things. I'll use the same analogy with, buddy comes to you. If you're feeling like something is slightly off about it at all, just don't do it. Right. Don't put the money into it. Career-wise, and for the opposite end, if you're like, man, I'm not saying do everything off of feelings and vibes. That's not what I'm saying. But like, trust your gut in many instances.
You got to trust at least.
I really do feel like that can serve you well. But what I was going to say with tying back into the last one, if you're even slightly kind of squishy on something as far as like, man, am I going to really be able to follow through on that? Then probably don't do it. Your dad knew that he could. That's why he pressed forward. Same thing we're telling you here. Like, if you know that you can. Again, apply to anything. Chasing the girl, career, physical, whatever. If you starting a business, if you know that you can, man, go for it. If you're a little wishy-washy on it, probably shouldn't. So that's the trusting your gut thing that I would say.
Again, going back to the calculation. The fourth, as you said, don't be stupid, follow your gut. I think that's very good. Let's get into the fifth one here.
Go for it.
This is the last that really wraps everything in. Trust that God will provide. We know from Matthew 6, right? He talks about, hey, I clothe the lilies of the field, right? Like the birds of the air have food to eat. We know that God will take care of us. We know that God will provide. That doesn't mean you will win every single time. This is not facing the Giants that every time you pray for a new truck, boom, pop, here comes a new
You're not a big fan of that movie, are you?
I'm not a big fan of that movie. Like, oh, wow, the team was cheating, and all of a sudden, look.
This little shrimpy guy kicks a 52-yard field goal for the win. Like, give me a break.
Oh, man. That we could poke so many holes in that movie. But that's the point is, like, look, God will provide for you. That doesn't mean that he's going to, it's straight aces. He's going to say yes to everything. Sometimes you're going to take a risk and it's going to fail. The biggest thing about risk taking is, again, you have to know that you might fail. What do you do in that moment? You bet on yourself. You trust God. You know that it's going to be okay if you work hard enough for it. So if you lose everything, there's so many people where their story comes from, I went broke and then I ended up making it all back because they worked their tail off.
Dave Ramsey is one of those.
Dave Ramsey is one of those. Yep. You look at Zuckerberg, he quits Harvard. A lot of those guys actually quit college, and everybody in their life said, this is a huge risk. What are you doing? You got into Harvard. You can't possibly do it. He bet on himself, and now guy's one of the richest men in the world starting Facebook. That's a story of a lot of guys. So that doesn't mean it's going to be your story. You quit college and you end up being broke and a bum, 5 years later. Like I'm not saying quit college, but I'm saying if you are betting on yourself, if you are trusting that God will provide, if you are trying to trust your gut and you really believe you've taken the calculated risk, you know the people involved, God, I think, will come through. The adage of God helps those who help themselves, it may not be biblical, but I do think it's true to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Like, if you are pushing for it and want it, and you're willing to take the risk and to show up time and again to try to make it happen, then, yeah, I think God blesses your efforts.
I don't have a lot to add to that. I think, again, we covered a lot of ground here, but those would be the generic principles we would say. Be calculated with your risk. Consider who the other people are. Bet on yourself. Don't be stupid and follow your gut, and then trust that God will provide. You're going to have opportunity to take a lot of risks in your life, and you're going to have the opportunity to say yes or say no to those risks. And as we've tried to share, we don't think you should always say yes, but we certainly don't think you should always say no. And it is one of those things that you just have to be smart about it, but consider, who is depending on me for this. So much here. We welcome your feedback, your comments, your thoughts on risk taking. It is part of being a man. I do believe that, part of being a godly young man as well. But also having the brain capacity to know when is this a stupid risk to take. So that's all I've got. Trust that God will provide. That's a great way to wrap. And so we will stop right there. This has been episode 57. We very much appreciate you watching and listening. We'll be back next week for another episode of the Godly Young Men Podcast.